As I mentioned, we're going to have a two-part presentation. We're going to start with our capable counsel that deals with tax matters, and that's Trish Melochick. She's going to do the legal framework about the assessment of real property, and I asked her to do this because there have been a lot of questions and posts on social media sites like Nextdoor, Facebook, sort of positing that the council can put a cap on real estate assessments or can gradually increase assessments over time, and asserting that council's directed that we do or don't do those kinds of things, and that's simply not allowed in the framework of the legal code of Virginia. But so that folks can hear directly about what codes we have to follow, Ms. Melochick will do a presentation. After she's done, I'll introduce our interim city assessor, who will then go into some examples about what's going on and help people to better understand what's at play with the assessments this year. Ms. Melochick.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. I'm glad to be in front of you this evening, and I'm going to be as brief as possible because I'm sure everyone just loves to hear a presentation that starts out with the Virginia Constitution. So I'll preface what I'm going to walk you through by reminding everybody that we live in a Dillon Rule state. What that means is a locality is only permitted to do those things that they are empowered to do through the state constitution or through the state General Assembly. We don't have the liberty to go outside that framework. We can only do what they allow us to do or what is absolutely necessary to implement what they have allowed us to do. So with that backdrop, I'm going to go ahead and take you step by step from the Constitution to the City Code to explain the legal framework for the methodology of real estate assessments. So one of the first constitutional principles set out is fair market value. The Virginia Constitution mandates that all assessments of real estate shall be at their fair market value to be ascertained as prescribed by law. Our Hampton City Charter, which in its own form is a law passed by the General Assembly specific to the City of Hampton, it states that all real estate shall be assessed at its fair market value as of January 1st of each year. Enhancing that proclamation is the Code of Virginia, which provides that all annual assessments shall be made at 100% of fair market value, so there is no dispute about the intent of what the meaning of fair market value is. There is some history to that 100% code section. Prior to 1977, the law throughout the state, localities had the ability to levy taxes on a fraction of the assessed value. And what was found is that that system made it very easy to mask inequalities amongst properties, amongst jurisdictions throughout the state, and it made computing the true tax rate on property in comparisons very difficult. And so in 1975, the General Assembly acted with a law that they did allow for a time period before its effective date until 1977 to bring everybody in conformity with the requirement that the fair market value to be used for all assessments for real estate statewide is to be 100% of fair market value. Our Hampton City Code, in compliance with that state code as well as our charter, provides that all property shall be assessed as its fair market value on January 1st. I will share with you that the law does not itself define what fair market value is. That's been defined in case law. Fair market value for case law is effectively the short answer to what's on the slide is the price a willing buyer and a willing seller would exchange a property for, with no compulsion on either side to enter into the transaction. The next requirement of the Virginia Constitution is uniformity. Uniformity is not an easy concept to grasp, and what even makes it more complicated, particularly in the administration of actual real estate taxes, is how you marry up and combine the requirements for both fair market value and uniformity. The Constitution states that all property shall be taxed and taxes shall be levied and collected under the general laws, which shall be uniform upon the same classes of subjects. Within Virginia, real estate has been deemed the class effectively. What uniformity means is equitably, not equally. It doesn't mean that all property should be valued using the same method or that every person should pay the same amount of tax. It means that whatever assessment methodology is used, it should arrive at the fair market value of that subject property, and it must produce a result that is not unreasonable or disproportionate in comparison to the valuations and levies upon all others in the same class. The Code of Virginia in furtherance of that uniformity provision of the Constitution, provides that the tax commissioner shall establish a classification system of real property for inclusion in the land books, that the local assessor can subdivide in those classifications, and that annually the tax commissioner will produce an assessment ratio study to compare the major property classes among the various jurisdictions, looking at the level of uniformity. This is not an oversight function. This is basically a report card, so to speak. It's a publicly available document that can be found out on the tax commissioner's website, and it basically lets you know, based on their statistical analysis and data compilation, just how well every jurisdiction is doing in complying with this uniformity provision. Pursuant to the common law, again, the law is in favor of giving more priority to uniformity than the fair market value requirement that I introduced to you first. However, in that context, it also says if it's impractical or impossible to enforce both, that being fair market value and uniformity, uniformity is the preferred priority as the just ultimate end to be attained. But it doesn't mean that you can deviate too far or from a relation to fair market value. So you can see from this framework the complexity that must go into a process that fairly and equitably assesses real property within a jurisdiction. The Constitution also provides that all real estate shall be segregated for local taxation only, which means it is a local tax function, not a state tax function. The Hampton City Charter provides that the City Council may, in lieu of the method prescribed by law, provide by ordinance for annual assessments and reassessments and the equalization of real estate. The state code otherwise provides for biennial assessments. In some jurisdictions, reassessments are done every 6 years, but here in Hampton we do them every year. To that end, there may be established a real estate department, and the city manager shall appoint the head of that department, and that department shall be responsible for the assessment of real estate. All powers conferred by law on the Commissioner of Revenue with respect to the assessment of real estate shall be transferred to this assessment department. So the general rule, but for our city charter, would be that the real estate assessment function would be carried out by the Commissioner of Revenue. But because of our charter and ordinances adopted here in Hampton, we actually do have a separate assessment office charged solely with the assessment of our real estate. In addition to those duties set out in the charter, the assessor is charged with valuing all lands and lots together with the improvements on them, to hear and give consideration to complaints, and they are charged with the special duty of increasing and decreasing assessments to accomplish the end that the burden of taxation shall rest equally and equitably on all citizens in the city. Just a little bit of general background on the appraisal process. Most of us are very familiar with a single property appraisal. A single property appraisal is something that you generally get when you want to buy a house, when you want to refinance, if you're in a business, if you have to do a business valuation. And what a single property appraisal is an analysis of just a single property or a single type of property, generally for a particular purpose and as of a single point in time. Compare that to the job of our real estate assessor. Our real estate assessor is charged with once a year, every year, at the same time every year, assessing every single property and lot within the city of Hampton. This is done through a mass appraisal system. In a mass appraisal system, as compared to that single property appraisal, the development of the value of estimates for groups of similar properties is done using various standards and techniques, such as through the collection and statistical analysis of large amounts of data. Properties are organized into different classes like single family, multifamily, hotels, commercial, etc., for comparability and for equity and uniformity. Each class is stratified based on characteristics: poor quality, excellent quality, medium quality. Various market values indicators are generated related to the local economic conditions, planning and zoning regulations, neighborhood boundaries, and things like that. Through all these things, the best valuation approach for the type of property has to be analyzed. Is it a cost approach, a sales approach, or an income approach? The assessor is charged with using sound judgment and best assessment practices. After I complete just a few more slides here, our assessor will come up and explain to you how in the city of Hampton all of those ingredients are poured into the mix to generate the assessments that each of us see on our annual tax bills. The final slide I have for you here today on the detail is about the tax rate. I've explained to you that the Constitution, the Code of Virginia, and our city charter limit how property is assessed, that being uniformly and at its fair market value. I've explained to you that the party charged with that is the real estate assessor. So now I also want to explain to you the part that our local governing body, the city council that's before you, plays in this process. The local governing body has the sole responsibility for determining the real estate tax levy by setting the rate in accordance with the budgetary needs of the city. So the council controls the rate, the assessor controls the assessment. The one limitation that is in the law on the governing body's ability to set that rate is a provision that requires that if the assessment results in an increase of more than 101% in the total real property levy, the locality is required to reduce its levy to produce not more than 101% of the prior year unless a public hearing is conducted and held to increase the rate above that amount because the governing body has deemed it necessary to meet its budgetary needs and to provide all the services requested and needed by its citizens. In the last 2 years, the City of Hampton has been in this position and likely will find itself in that this year. So for that purpose, you will see in future agendas a specific public hearing about this very subject, the fact that our assessments have increased and a discussion of the need for what tax rate needs to be applied for the city to continue to operate as it does today. Generally speaking, the ability of the local governing body to impose a tax rate or determine the tax rate is just a subject of the laws of the Commonwealth of Virginia. But COVID, as it has brought many unique things into all of our lives, has also brought a unique characteristic into the ability of our local governing bodies to levy the tax rates. At this time, we're not completely sure how this will play out, but the federal government has imposed certain requirements and obligations on state and local entities receiving certain COVID relief funds, some of which are tied to revenue generation and some of which preclude anybody from reducing their tax rates. It's not yet known if or how this may or may not impact the ability of a locality such as Hampton to modify its own tax rates. And you have to understand the context of that is basically the federal government is providing a substantial amount of funding, and so they don't want to create a false need because a locality or government has manipulated its revenue streams. So they're granting the money based on conditions that exist and are trying to control that environment. But as stated above, it's such a fluid process at this point, we're not sure how it may affect us. So in summary, I'd like to say that the Constitution of Virginia is the source of the fundamental principles for real property valuation, including the requirement that all property be valued at its fair market value and uniformly among the same classes of property. The Code of Virginia, the City Charter, and the City Code require that the fair market value of all real property in the city be determined annually as of January 1st, and that all property shall be assessed at 100% of its fair market value at that point in time. Thus, governing bodies cannot mandate a cap or an incremental increase in valuation on fair market value assessments. The Code of Virginia, the City Charter, and the City Code further provide that annual assessments shall be derived by the assessor and that the tax rate to be imposed on those assessments shall be set by City Council. So with that, I'll open the floor if anybody has any questions on this particular component. I'll entertain them now.
Ms. Melochick, if I can, Mr. Mayor, I'd just like you to clarify the uniformity provision one more time, because I'd like you to elaborate or uniformity provision by answering this question, because we've had some people say, well, I don't understand why some assessments grow by 6%, some grow by 3%, some decrease, some this year are 20% or higher. And if you just said they have to be uniform, do you mean uniform percentage or do you mean something else? And can you clarify that for folks? Because I think a lot of times people will hear uniform and think that means every property gets assessed at the same percentage.
No, ma'am. That's not at all what that provision means. So thank you for the opportunity to clarify that. What uniformity means is that the same methodology is used to arrive at the value of a property. And for example, a cost valuation is one where replacement cost is looked at on homes. Square footage comes into play. A square footage rate will be played out for the houses. What that's telling you is that for all houses that are comparably situated with the same characteristics, the same rate shall be applied to the square footage to derive the value. So in some cases, because of the mass appraisal process, because this is not a single property appraisal on every single parcel in the city every year, you can find anomalies or differences because sales aren't timely reported or information regarding property improvements aren't readily tracked. So oftentimes, once an assessor is able to go in and look at a parcel, sometimes they have to play a little bit of catch up. Because of that late reported data or that late found data, to actually bring all properties uniformly on par to be fairly assessed using the same methodology to arrive at that fair market value.
And so when they do need to play catch up, I know you said it in your summary slide, but if you can just echo it, when they identify that, the law requires them to provide that catch up at one time versus over a series of steps. Is that what I understood correctly?
Yes, the law provides that all properties shall be assessed at its fair market value. So at the point it's determined that an adjustment is necessary to bring a property to fair market value, there's no provision of the law that allows for a graduated implementation of that. The assessor is charged by law to impose the valuation at 100% of that fair market value.
And one last clarification before council members ask their questions. What role, if any, does council have in the assessment process?
They do not. And quite frankly, if they did, they would have to follow the same law. So
in other words, council can't dictate an assessment, an assessment methodology, a percentage increase, any of those things. That's completely, to the assessor. And I know that our assessor will talk about the appeal process because they do provide for an appeal process.
Correct.
That involves a citizen board that they appoint. But short of that, I'm just getting in the record.
Yes.
That you're saying that the council has no role in determining assessments.
No, ma'am. Council does not have a role in determining assessments. As I mentioned, it's a calculated process, statutorily driven, that has to be followed and is implemented by our assessor.
Okay. I saw Vice Mayor's hand.
Yes, sir. Trish, thank you. I'm glad you went back to this particular slide on uniformity because there was one statement in here that did catch my attention, and that had to do with the methodology used has to produce a fair market value, but then it says that it must produce a result that is not unreasonable or disproportionate in comparison to other valuations. I mean, could you explain what that means, or who would determine, define what is unreasonable in this case as it's written in the code?
I would say that unreasonable would mean disproportionate or unfair. The charge of the Constitution is that all assessments shall be uniform and at their fair market value, and the goal of that is to achieve a fair and equitable disbursement of the tax burden among the citizens. It means that I should pay my proportionate share. If I live in a house that's worth $500,000 and my neighbor lives in a house that's worth $20,000, we should proportionally share our share of the burden. We shouldn't each pay $100. I should certainly be paying more based on the size and value of my house as compared to that individual, while both of us should probably be assessed based on the same square footage value for our houses. Another example is that, for example, some properties are the best assessment method for them is the income method, like a hotel. And all of your hotels have varied accounting methods. And if you have to look at an income statement to derive to incorporate into your valuation process, you have to make sure that they're accounting for things equally. And there's actually been some litigation that involved the fact that many hotels account for their reserve, their backup funding in different ways. So if you just carte blanche factor in the reserves of all hotels, you'll end up with a disproportionate analysis because everybody's doing it differently. So the law said it's okay to take out that varying factor so that all of your hotels are on a level playing field when you derive their assessment.
So, Mayor, if I may, just following up on the Vice Mayor's question.
Sure.
unreasonable or disproportionate doesn't relate to how much of an increase or decrease you have in your value.
Correct.
Because the value should be produced based upon what sales data.
Correct.
and or income data, if it's an income approach, produce.
Correct.
And if you do have a large change in value, whether that's up or down, the locality is required to account for that.
Yes, and you are correct. The unreasonable is not about the change that occurs. The unreasonable would be related to, were you assessed in the same manner as a comparably situated taxpayer? And if you were, and a larger adjustment was required to bring you up to that, that is not what the law means by unreasonable in this context.
Any other questions or comments by members of council? Thank you.
Yes.
So hopefully you found that legal framework helpful. Now we're going to have our interim city assessor, Libby Griebel, come up and do a brief presentation, reminding you sort of what are some of the forces that are at play at this year. And as she comes up, I'll just say, as Ms. Melochick's already noted, we use a mass appraisal system. We have over 44,000 parcels, residential, just single-family parcels that we look at each year. And obviously, it's impractical to visit every one of those every year, but we also, as Ms. Griebel will mention, will physically visit properties on a schedule. And so what you're going to see in some areas of the city this year, we had, well, all areas of the city, we had robust sales. But we also had robust sales plus physical inspection. And the combination of these factors have resulted in some large increases in some areas of the city. So I asked Ms. Griebel to give some examples of that and to show what happened and explain what happened so that folks who are watching or want to come back and watch this presentation later can have a better understanding of how the assessment process works and why some unusual results may have come about this year.
I will do my best. Thank y'all for allowing me to come tonight and make this presentation. So let's just get started. I wanted to play this. This is a little video that we have on our website. It's been there for many years. Let's see if I can get it to come up. Where are you? Where'd you go? I don't know why it's not working. We had a problem with this yesterday. This is a that when I click on that, it's supposed to give me a.
Okay. Yeah, the video is not embedded.
It's
not embedded in the presentation.
So what does that mean? I didn't put that in. So you may not get to see this little video. You'll have to visit our website at www.hampton.gov/assessor. And this is, in fact, on our website. Are you going to find it? Mm-hmm. You're too good. It would be under www.hampton.gov. /assessor. ASS. Yeah, that's right, ASS. We have a little YouTube. Where is it now? There it is. We have wonderful IT folks, don't we? I mean, just amazing.
So there's a lot of misunderstanding about the role of appraisers and about the effect of property tax that homeowners pay. When someone hears the term appraiser, they seem to think of a scary figure reaching for their wallet. Not so. Appraisers don't set tax rates. Appraisers don't chase tax dollars. An appraiser is interested in fairly determining property values, and they take great pride in it. Property tax is determined by a simple formula. Appraisers only affect one of these variables, the value, and they do so with incredible accuracy. Appraisers aren't tax collectors or even tax setters. They're just fellow taxpayers, and their primary goal is to make everything fair and equitable. Imagine that you were in a restaurant with two friends. One orders a hot dog, one a plate of caviar, and you order a steak. The waiter comes to the table with a total bill of $100, but he doesn't know how much each of you should pay. If everyone paid the same amount, the guy who ordered caviar might be happy. is your property. Just like these meals, some people's property is worth more than others. And it's the appraiser's job to determine how much each property is worth. That's it. So, in the same way the value of these menu items would need to be determined, an appraiser places values on properties to ensure fairness and equity. After the appraiser determines the value of each property, local governing bodies will set their budgets for the coming year. They set the tax rate in order to produce the dollars needed for their budgets. The value of a property does not affect the amount of property tax needed. The sum total of all these budgets is a set number that has to be divided up among all the property owners. So even if everyone's value was cut in half by the appraisers, the tax rate would be raised in order to generate the same amount of tax revenue. The appraisers don't determine the taxes you pay. They just determine the values of properties to keep everything as fair and equitable as possible. When you notice a change in your property's appraised value, the change is the result of a never-ending quest for fairness and accuracy. Appraisers are graded on their performance, so there is a detailed system to get accurate valuations. First, the appraiser looks at similar properties that have sold, their sale prices, and the terms and conditions of each sale. That's the reason your home won't just be compared to the place next door. Studying things like square footage, age, and location helps appraisers determine how comparable another property is to yours. Even seemingly small details, like an extra bathroom or finished basement, can result in significant differences in value in two otherwise identical homes. Appraisers maintain a thorough database of real estate information to make this process as precise as possible. Changes in value are typically the result of local real estate market sales or major changes to a property. Remodel a kitchen or finish a basement, and your property's value could increase. When you see your home's appraised value, you can rest assured that the number has not been drawn out of a hat, nor generated with anything but equity and accuracy in mind. Long story short, appraisers are here to help, not trying to hinder. Their focus is accurate values, not tax collection. The only things an appraiser chases are fairness and equity, and they take great pride in it.
Okay, let's see. And that is on our website if anyone wanted to go back and take a look at it. Perfect. Thank you so much. Thank you. Okay, let's get started. Mass appraisals. For mass appraisal, which is ad valorem taxation, our office, like most assessment offices, use a computer-assisted mass appraisal system known as CAMA, which is an automated system for maintaining our property data, valuing the property, notifying owners, and ensuring tax equity through uniform valuations. The CAMA system takes into account all the attributes of the property to include but not limited to size, age, quality, condition, building materials, amenities such as garages, porches, decks, patios, detached garages, structures like pools, and any other improvements that are actually attached to the land. The properties are placed in a neighborhood with similar characteristics. We have approximately 272 neighborhoods in the city. They're placed in neighborhoods for valuation purposes to be appraised in mass through our CAMA system. Neighborhoods do not move up or down at the same rate as one another, as demand for different types and locations of properties varies. Also, individual properties do not move at the same rate up or down either, depending on the attributes of that particular property and the demand for that type of property. Review and analysis of market comparable sales determine the value of properties within a neighborhood as we compare the differences and the similarities. The goal of the assessor's office is to visit each neighborhood every 5 years for a thorough review of physical characteristics. Oftentimes, various structures like a conversion from a garage to living area or a porch enclosed to living area are discovered. Sometimes we discover total remodels. Oftentimes, no building permits were obtained, and the assessor's office would have no way of knowing of these changes without the physical inspection. Discovered changes add value. Once we discover them, they're added to the property. The market increases are added on top of that. So oftentimes you will see a home in a neighborhood that has maybe increased more than another by a percentage because of that very reason. We've discovered a structure, we've added it to the value, and then we place the market factors on top, which increase it even more. A sample assessment change. This is just this is a specific property with the address redacted, but it's the FY21 assessment was $159,300. It increased $51,200 this year to $210,500. At the physical review, the appraiser discovered that the kitchen and bath were remodeled, a 700-square-foot patio had been added, and an enclosed porch had been added. So the assessment for that parcel increased 32%, while the overall neighborhood only increased 6%, 5.6%. So this is just an example of what I was just speaking to.
Excuse me, let me ask you a
Yes,
question.
sir.
You discovered that the kitchen and bath had been remodeled based on a permit, or someone allowed you inside?
Well, no, when we walk the neighborhoods, if a lot of times the property owners will come out, and you can often tell from a house if it's been remodeled just from the outside. They knock on a door, and if the property owner verifies that information, or perhaps it's sold through multiple listing, which multiple listing today has a multitude of photos to show the renovations that have been done on properties. So that may have been why the appraiser even went out. Maybe they saw it as a listing in multiple listing, or saw it as a sale in multiple listing, realized it had been renovated, went out and said, oh my goodness, in addition to this kitchen and bath, we've also discovered they have a patio and an enclosed porch that we didn't have.
Thank you.
Yes, sir. Any other questions? Moving forward, the assessor's office conducts a mass appraisal. As Patricia Melochick just noted, it differs in scope from a fee appraisal or a single property appraisal. A single property appraisal, as she said, is oftentimes done for mortgage, sometimes for divorce situations, sometimes for tax reasons. But it differs in scope because that appraisal is done as on a specific date, which is its effective date, and they have to use the 3 most comparable sales. So that means that they are looking at 3 current sales in a neighborhood or around the neighborhood as similar to that property as they can find, whereby the mass appraisal is looking at sales from January 1 through the end of the year. The ratio studies, which are assessment to sales ratios studies that we use, we look at our assessments, we look at the sale prices of properties, and it determines an assessment ratio. And as an example, if a house were assessed, for instance, at $100,000 and it's sold for $105,000, that means that it's at our assessment is only at 95% of value. That's an indicator that that particular assessment is too low because we're mandated to assess at 100% of market value. In that case, we're not there.
Another question.
Yes, sir.
I'm curious. Do you have someone that's sitting there looking at this thing on a daily basis? You have like a tickler file where something pops up and says, oh, there's activity on this particular property, and so I need to look at this? I mean, if you're looking at, you said neighborhoods like maybe once every 5 years.
But that's a physical review.
Right. Okay. But the other review is what? What triggers the other type of review?
Well, the other review involves a lot of things. We monitor the multiple listing system. We look at sales. We look at properties that have been withdrawn from the market for whatever reason. We look at all the sales.
But this is almost like on a daily basis or a weekly basis? How does it happen?
Well, it depends on where in the process that particular appraiser is. We're all appraisers and with an end result, but to get to that result, for instance, I may use the next 3 weeks to do field inspections. Another appraiser may be looking at multiple listing for the next 3 weeks, and then they go out and do their field inspection. So it's on an individual appraisal level, but they all look at this information. And we gather this information as sales come through. Then the appraiser will vet that sale because they need to know. They will go out and visit the property or go to the property to physically look at it to be sure that it's an arm's length sale, which I will get into that as we move forward through this through this presentation.
Okay, I'll say my next question.
Okay.
Question, please.
So,
Excuse me,
Libby.
Councilman Brown.
No problem. Excuse me.
Yes, sir.
For the general public, can you explain the difference between an appraisal and an assessment?
well, an appraisal, they're both appraisals, if you will. It's just that in ad valorem taxation, it's known as an assessment. And we try to differentiate that from a single property appraisal because oftentimes folks will think, well, I have an appraisal or I had, this is gospel. And all of our appraisers in our office are licensed appraisers. So they're all professional appraisals that could be out doing fee appraisals themselves. And so we try to use the word assessment as opposed to appraisal because we're in the assessment world versus what we call the fee side of the appraisal industry.
And the reason I said that is because a lot of times I hear this, my house was assessed by the city for whatever it was assessed for, but my appraisal was higher.
Correct.
Okay.
And that and one of the reasons for that is because that appraisal is being done again as a single property appraisal at a specific point in time with the 3 most recent sales they've got, where I may have assessed that property at something less than that because I'm looking at sales from January to December 31st, and I have to do it in mass. I can't individually assess or appraise every single parcel on it. I can't do it on an individual basis. So that's why we are mass appraisers, and the purpose of the mass appraisal is for tax purposes and not for I tell people this: don't rely on your assessment to know what to list your house for sale. If you're getting ready to list your house for sale, do not rely on that. Do not rely on it to buy a property, because the two are really not, they have some relevance to one another, but the assessment is, again, based in mass, where the single appraisal property is what I would recommend to anyone that's listing their property for sale. See what the market's doing over the last 2 months or the last month rather than the last year. Okay? Let me go back. The assessment ratio studies are used to gauge the assessment level. As for the example I gave you, whether the neighborhood assessments need to be increased or decreased or no change whatsoever. The CAMA system ensures equity in the valuation of the characteristics. The land is added to that total value, and then each appraiser calibrates their neighborhoods to the market. And that's real important, because the characteristics of a property, that's what's so important, because they are valued through our CAMA system. And so age and quality and condition, all of those play a factor. So your house may be 2000 and yours is 1965. There is going to be a difference. If everything else being equal, there's going to be a depreciation factor that's calculated in that. So that's what our CAMA system does. It equalizes all of those values. We use sales from January 1 through December 31st. Were used for the ratio study. Again, they were vetted to ensure that they're arm's length, meaning that they're sales that don't have any undue stress behind them. The Department of Taxation gives us a list of what are considered non-arm's length sales that we are not to use in our ratio studies in producing assessments. And the list, this is not all inclusive, but bank sales, foreclosure sales, short sales, auctions, government-owned sales like Fannie Mae and VA that have taken the properties back in, judicial sales, family-related sales. They are considered non-arm's length sales, and we would not use them in any of our assessment valuations. Commercial, just a quick note on commercial, because this is primarily, I am focusing on residential here tonight, but I just wanted to point out that we did have a decrease in commercial by about 0.9%. And primarily this was due to the reduction in hotels, movie theaters, restaurants, shopping centers as a result of the COVID impact. The cost, the sales comparison, and the income approaches to value are reviewed on all commercial properties. However, the income producing properties like hotels, movie theaters, restaurants, and shopping centers typically are valued on the income approach, where the residential is valued on sales comparison approach. So I just wanted to just insert that. This is just a map of the residential changes throughout the city. You'll note on the side the key. It's very hard to see, so we broke this down into quadrants so that you could see it more clearly, but there is on this side no change. The dark green, they had a 9% or more change. The more medium green was 7 to 8 and on down. The yellow was -1%. And that little yellow is right here. And the reason for that particular decrease was it was a new neighborhood. We were, I guess, maybe not aggressive to some degree in that when we were evaluating new construction for that neighborhood, but as time has passed, it has not held, this values did not hold up completely, and so we made a minor reduction in that neighborhood in mass to recognize that some of those sale prices were in fact not at the assessed values. So let me go to the next one. If anyone is interested in any particular quadrant, this is a northwest quadrant out Big Bethel Road, Belgrade, out near the York County line, Langley Air Force Base here on your right, Hampton Woods, Michaels Woods. You can kind of see what's going on based on the key code. The northeast quadrant, which is Fox Hill, let's see, Harris Creek, Essex Park, Buck Row, the southeast quadrant, which includes Hampton Shores, let's see, Phoebus, Merrimack Shores, just to name a few. And then we have the southwest quadrant, which is out towards the Newport News line, which is down south of Mercury Boulevard, Aberdeen Gardens, Powhatan Park, Rosalie Gardens, Garden City, and then north of that you have the Wheelton Road area. The change of assessment notices out of 46,000 parcels, we sent out 43,350 notices. Of those that were sent out, 98% were increases and 2% were decreases for residential. Again, the decrease count was approximately 758 parcels. And again, this is the changes, the increases were 1 to 3% were 19.8% overall. Those that had a 3 to 5% increase, 26% of the notices that went out, 5 to 10%. They had a 5 to 10% increase, which represented 27.6% of those that went out. 10 to 20% were 12, and at 20% or more, we had approximately 1,633 parcels that had 20% or more increase in value. Of that, 427 parcels had not changed in 5 years. I think that's important. The residential change overall was a 6.5% increase. Oftentimes in a slower moving market, there are no sales in a neighborhood or there are limited sales in a neighborhood. Our office has tried to be sensitive to the property owners as a whole by not increasing neighborhood values without a substantial amount of sales to justify an increase. Perhaps we've been too conservative because now with this robust market, there are sales everywhere to indicate if neighborhood assessments need to move up, down, or remain the same. So some neighborhoods that have had no movement in little or little movement over the, say, the past 5 to 7 years have seen some extraordinary increases. Just to give you an idea of appeal of assessments, and some of these are maybe not completely representative. For instance, in 2018, you would think, oh my goodness, what happened here? That was actually a marina condominium where down in South, what is that? South Hall Landing? No, yeah, not South Hall. Salt Ponds. I'm sorry, Salt Ponds. There are all of the slips in that marina are actually condominium slips. They're all can be individually owned and individually sold. That particular property, the property owner who has the most slips in that property appealed everything. So they showed up as individual appeals as opposed to one appeal. So that's why that number is skewed like that. But as you can see to date, and this is maybe off a wee bit, but to date, 46 office reviews right now and 1 board of review. So we feel real good about the number of calls that are coming in. Only 6% of these 46,000 residential parcels had not had a change in 5 years. Just as a matter of notation, that was from fiscal year 17 to 21. And again, that goes back to if there are no sales to support a change in value, be it up or down, the assessor's office will take the posture of just letting it remain until we have better data to make that kind of a decision. As of Tuesday, there have been 276 inquiries into our office with 46 office appeals and 1 board of review. Of the 46, 23 are in process, meaning the appraisers are reviewing those now, working with the property owners. 17 thus far have resulted in a no change, 3 in an increase. Believe it or not, we have had some folks who did feel like their value was too low and have worked with the appraiser. They've gone through all the data, and in some instances there will be an increase, and we've had 3 decrease. The following slides are examples of properties that had substantial reassessment increases with no building permits, major corrections, or condition changes whereby the property owner and the appraiser agreed the proposed assessment was correct in terms of equity as well as market value, meaning that after the appraiser met with the property owner, worked with the property owner, they were satisfied with the data, with the information that was provided, and there was no further appeal. This particular property, the FY21 assessment was $527,500. It increased $82,500 this year to $610,000. The assessment had not moved for a couple of years. The current assessment, even after this large increase, is still not at this 2008 assessment. So just, and I will speak to this a little bit later, but we are still overall not at the level of assessment in value that we were in 2008. And the next one I have, this was an assessment of 86.1. It increased to it increased by 37,200 to 123. This particular property had not moved in a year, but even this one had a large increase. It's still not at the FY08 assessment. So I'm just trying to give some examples of properties that still, even though they had significant increases, we are still not at that level of assessment. This particular one, the assessment was $157,000. It increased $26,500 to $183,500. The assessment had an increase from FY21, from the FY20, and as you can see, it had a significant jump, even though it was moving along since 2019, steady kind of moving along, poking along, but in 2022, there was enough market evidence to move this assessment by $26,000, and the property owner recognized that, that the assessment was in fact correct. Here's another one, was assessed at $339,700, increased to $84,300 to $424,000. This assessment had not moved in about 4 years, and even after the large increase, it's still not at, again, not at the FY08 assessment of $540,800. It's at $424,000. This is another property that the property owner agreed, even after the inquiry and/or appeal, office appeal, that it was the value was in fact correct. This is just a chart just to show you, if you will, where values were in 2002, how they moved up in 2006. They were just rolling in 2008. 2008, 9, 10, kind of maybe into 11 a little bit. It started to fall, and as you can see what happened to our market when the market started falling at the end of 2008. We play a little bit of catch up, because if you recall, at 2008 is when the market really started to fall, and so really our 2009 really didn't start to really capture that until 2011. But it started leveling out in 16, 18, and now it's moving back up. And as you can see, this just shows again that the level of assessment is still not where it was back when we were at our peak. The market recovery, this again just emphasizes that we're still off by $232 million in terms of residential assessments as of the 2010 land book, which was our highest, that was our market high of assessed value in residential, and we're off by that amount. This next slide illustrates a few neighborhoods that did have a median lower assessment value in 2008 compared to 2020. And when I say median value, we're looking at medians, and a median means it's in the middle. And that's what the assessment world deals with, are median ratios. And the reason we deal with that is because rather than an average and averaging in lows and highs, it basically trims both sides of the coin, so to speak, or the line, and it eliminates any anomalies on the low side or on the high side, and centers in on that concentration, that median of where the values are concentrating. Most of the neighborhoods had a higher median assessment value in 2008 compared to 2020, which is what we've just gone through, indicating that the assessment values are still not at 2008. But there are some neighborhoods that have had substantial increases. Just because there may have been no sales or limited sales, that did not indicate or warrant a change in the past, but due to the robust sales in the areas now, we're seeing evidence that they needed to move. And so consequently, some properties moved significantly. Just to give you an idea, FY08 to FY22, these are median assessments. And as you can see, this one, Walker Road East Loop, is higher than it was in 2008. Fox Hill, of course, is significantly higher. Just to give you an idea, Buck Road, 1st through 6th Streets. But for the most part of these neighborhoods, they still have not reached that 2008 level. This is just a flow chart to emphasize what we just went over. It reads left to right, Colonial Acres. This is Colonial Acres, Michael's Woods, and this is Merrimack Shores, to show you in 2008 where the level of assessment was, how they started falling, and how they're moving back up, trying to approach that value 2022 back up to this high in 2008, 9, and 10. The real estate market conditions and values for 2020 trended upwards, obviously. 2020 medians, just to give you an idea, the days on market, and this is information that I pulled out of our local multiple listing system. The 2020 medians, 20 days on the market in 2020 was the median for a 3-bedroom, 2-bath, 1,600 square foot house built in 1969 with a median sale price of $2,049. The 2019 medians days on market were 42, double. The 3-bedroom, 2-bath, 1,600 square feet built in 69 with a sale price of $188. So you can see there's approximately a 10% increase overall. And this did exclude government-owned short sales, estate sales, bank repos. Just as a matter of note, we did have a neighborhood that had 47 inquiries. One resulted in an office review. The property owner contacted the assessor's office, and the appraiser for the neighborhood returned their call. And that's typically what is happening. The appraiser discussed the assessment and provided the comparable sales information to demonstrate that the proposed FY22 reassessment was correct. And this is a good example of the appeal process working. For the property owner to contact the assessor's office, they will likely get a recording, but if they leave their name and phone number, the calls are distributed to the appropriate appraiser, and the appraiser returns the phone call within a 24-hour period. Step 1 is the inquiry. Thank you, Robin. This is our phone number, 727-8311. You give the call center your address. The appraiser for your neighborhood will call you back and discuss how the assessment was determined. There is an officer review, which is step 2. If you disagree after your inquiry, you file for an officer review. The deadline is March 15th. The appraiser will work with you by offering to make an on-site inspection to ensure that all data is correct. They'll review the sales data and contact you. They will do that in the office and then contact you to review the sales data with you and explain how the assessment was determined. And finally, at step 3, there is a board review, which is an independent citizen body. If you disagree with the office review, you may file a board of review application, which is due. The deadline is 4/15/2020. The application is available on our website, so where you can fill it out and we'll mail it to you. You can come by the office and we'll come down and bring one down to the lobby right now. So all you need to do is call the office. Again, this is an independent citizens board that does review the evaluations. But the homeowner does have to demonstrate to the board that the assessed value is not correct and why. You just don't walk in and say, oh, well, I think it's too high. Well, why? Well, I don't know. I just think it's too high. The board of review is going to expect for you to provide them information. And that is the end of my presentation, and I am happy to answer any questions that I can for anyone.
Libby ended with a last slide, but she didn't highlight it, so I'm going to highlight it.
I'm sorry. What did I miss?
I just want to highlight that our office, the very last one you had up there, but you didn't speak to it.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Because you're
the
humble.
Certificate of Excellence.
I want to say that our assessor's office is one of only a handful in the state of Virginia that have been awarded the International Association of Assessing Officers Certificate of Excellence in Administration of Assessments. This is a very hard certification to achieve. We not only were the first certified in Virginia, but we have been recertified. And again, you can see that only Chesapeake, Norfolk, Petersburg, Portsmouth, and Fairfax County also hold that designation. That really speaks to the quality of our assessment team, the rigor that they undergo for their training, and the fact that we consistently get good reviews on our sales ratio studies. So I know a lot of people say, well, there must be something wrong. You know? I just want to highlight that we have a very competent team that really takes great care. I think the video that was set off the presentation really speaks to their commitment for equity and fairness in the assessment process. And that's why, frankly, there have been some properties that haven't been adjusted for a couple years because they wanted to have evidence, not just one sale or 2 sales, but a significant number of sales to demonstrate any change in value. Because if we're going to increase an assessment or conversely decrease an assessment, we want to have confidence that that assessment should be changed.
Correct.
We don't just do it to make budget numbers, which is what a lot of people think happens. And the fact that they do that and do that with a lot of rigor is really how we have achieved this accreditation and certification. So she was being humble, not really speaking about the excellent qualifications, but I want to assure folks that we do have very competent people working for us.
Absolutely. Everyone in our office is a licensed appraiser in the state of Virginia.
Mr. Mayor and council members, I know that was a rather lengthy presentation, but we're getting a lot of questions about assessments, and I thought it might be timely for you and for those at home to learn more about the assessment process, but the legal framework and how it's conducted. Ms. Griebel's glad to take any questions. And of course, we announced earlier today we would be doing some budget workshops and input sessions. We will make ourselves available to answer any questions. Obviously, if there is a concern about an assessment, it should be directed through that formal appeals process. But we will continue to answer questions about how our assessments derived, how our tax rates derived, et cetera, throughout our public budget input process.
But I would like to encourage anyone that may be listening tonight, if you have a question on your assessment, call the assessor's office, speak to the appraiser who appraised the property, and work with them, because we are here not in an adversarial position. We are here to get it right. That's all we're trying to do. And so the appraiser will sit down with you and go through that process, go through that material to show you how they arrived at the value. And again, if you are not satisfied with the outcome, then you have the Board of Review, which is an independent body. So I just encourage anyone who has a question, if any of you have a question, contact our office so that the appraiser can sit down with you or speak with you over the phone and go over the information so that you have confidence in your value.
Thank you. Any questions? Well, Vice Mayor Gray?
Just for clarity, go back a couple of pages on the slide, the border review deadline.
Yes, sir. That's for board of review is
Right.
April 15th, and March 15th is the board of review, is the office review. Let me see. I don't remember
No,
what
I think
page
there was just a typo. It said 2020. It should have said 20.
Oh, it did? Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
No matter how many times we review these, it seems we always miss something. Let's see.
But I did just want to go back
Yes,
to a couple
March
of points.
15th, 5 days. March 15th is the deadline for the office review, and April 15th for the board of review. So we give the citizens quite a long time, probably more than most localities, to actually appeal their properties, and so it's more than 30 days for each one.
Just for a brief point of clarification, there is no requirement that you go to the office before you go to the board of review. So if you did miss your opportunity to speak with the assessor by that March 15th deadline, you are not precluded from going to the board of review. So that board of review application date is open to every citizen, commercial, industrial, residential in the city of Hampton.
Absolutely.
Okay, and so so when you do an inquiry, the appraiser for that particular neighborhood is the one who does the initial inquiry.
Yes, sir. You would call. Go ahead.
But if the property owner requests an office review, is that the same appraiser? Or
Yes,
is that
sir.
something different?
The inquiry is merely, oftentimes we'll have folks that will call and say that they're just inquiring. They really are just inquiring. I noticed my property value's gone up. I was just wondering why. And the appraiser may say, well, we had a half a dozen sales in your neighborhood. We looked at all the data and they went up. They're like, okay, that's fine. And so the inquiry sometimes it's just not as detailed. But if the property owner says, yeah, you know, I think I want to go ahead and file an office review, then a very detailed review of the property takes place, whereby they offer to come out and measure the property, because the first thing we want to do is ensure that all the data that we have on your property is correct. And so that's where the real detail comes in, would be in the office review.
Okay. But is it the same appraiser who
Yes, sir.
covers that neighborhood?
Yes, sir. Now,
does the review?
I have with me tonight Steve. Sorry. All of a sudden his name escapes me. Steve Edwards is our residential supervisor. He reviews every residential change that is made in terms of appeal. So if you want, if somebody's not happy with their appraiser, if you will, and they want to speak to a supervisor, then Steve is here to do that, and I as well. I speak directly with the property owners, offer to come out, do whatever I can do, because everyone is working and we work as a team, and whoever's available to go or do does that. But oftentimes if someone, maybe personalities are different and they say, you know, I just want to speak to someone else, then Steve would be the one that they would speak with. But he does do all the review and looks at all the data before signing off on any appeal up or down.
Okay. And then I know I saw on a previous slide that you had 47 inquiries or reviews.
That was in one neighborhood that we're speaking to, that we had 46 inquiries.
Yes.
Oh, right here, 47.
Right. Okay. All right.
Which one?
They were inquiries.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
All right. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, we've had 270 inquiries, I think, and a lot of those inquiries never go to the office review. They just have a few questions that the appraiser is able to answer, and folks are fine with.
Okay.
Mayor.
Yes.
Question?
Councilman Brown?
Yeah. Libby,
Yes, sir.
Board of Review, once you go to the Board of Review, is that the final authority?
No, sir, there is a third level, which is circuit court. So
Okay.
if you are dissatisfied with the outcome from your board of review hearing, you certainly have the right to go to circuit court, and that's the final one.
And when you physically do an assessment of a property and you go to a home and notice they got a new deck and some other additions, do you check to see whether they have a building permit for that, or you just How do you handle
Well,
that?
one would hope that if there was a building permit, we already have it.
Okay.
Of course, things do happen. Things fall through the cracks sometimes. But yes, if we come out to do, let's say you call and you're not happy with your assessment, then we come out to your property to ensure that our data is correct. That's the first thing. And some people take offense at that, and because they're, well, you know, you're going to raise my assessment. Well, I don't know. If I come out and you've got a 500 square foot addition on it that I don't know about, yeah, we're probably going to raise your assessment. So we try to let folks know that, you know, this process can go up or down. It can stay the same. It can go up. It can go down. So if I do come out to your property and I see that you have just added a 300 square foot deck and put an in-ground pool in, and for whatever reason we don't have a permit, we didn't know about it, we're going to pick that value up and add that immediately to your property record card as if you had gotten a permit and completed that permit.
My turn.
Yes, sir.
I used to follow the assessments really, really closely, and I stopped.
Follow what?
Assessments.
Oh, okay.
I used to look at different neighborhoods and compare.
Right.
And I stopped. But a couple of things. One, a previous assessor said that assessments aren't always based on other properties in your neighborhood. And in fact, in your video, it states your house doesn't necessarily have to be compared to the house next to you.
Okay.
And I was told that in my particular neighborhood that we were being compared, at least houses on one side of the street, were being compared to houses in another area. Is that true?
Well, that can be true. It's just like if you're not going to be compared to the house next door. Well, maybe the house next door is a 1,200 square foot rancher and you have a 2,400 square foot two-story. We're not going to use that 1,200 square foot house as a value indicator for your property. Now, if you're living on a street, as an example, that has, on the left side are all 1950 year-built houses, and on the right side of the street, they're all 2,000 year-built houses, those neighborhoods are not going to be compared to one another. We're going to look at, maybe there are no sales in your neighborhood that's 1950. So what we're going to do is go and look at surrounding neighborhoods that have similar characteristics, maybe have sales, to see what is a 1,200 square foot 1950 house bringing today? What is it selling for today? Because the ones across the street that were built in 2000 have no bearing on that, or let me say this, have very little bearing on the ultimate value of that property. Now, it may make it more desirable because you've got a $300,000 home across the street from you, so somebody may like that, and that could have an influence on your value. But we are typically going to go to a neighborhood that's very similar, with similar characteristics, to ensure that our values are in line.
Okay. I was small, and I'll leave that one alone. Because all the houses on my street were built in 1983.
Okay.
And they're all, for the most part, the same design, for the most part, except the ones on my side of the street have a creek in the back. But that said.
Well, okay, and at one time, and that may still be the case, and Steve, you can speak to that, but at one time, the assessor's office took the posture that a neighborhood was divided from interior lots versus waterfront lots, because oftentimes they sell so differently, even though obviously it's an identical house.
Okay.
And so we had neighborhoods divided between waterfront and non-waterfront. And we are in the process really of merging them, so to speak, back together again, and just looking at the difference in land values, because really, again, it's evaluating the sales and looking at the similarities and dissimilarities. But again, generally speaking, if your house is across the street on the water, typically the building values should be relatively similar. As opposed, and the land, it would be more in the land.
Okay.
So we're in the process too of trying to put a hard look on land in general. Of course, in city, because we are so built out, there are very few land sales, but we are seeing a lot of infill land sales on available lots. We're seeing some houses being torn down and new houses being built. And we are looking very hard at those infill lot sales to try to determine. But when it comes to waterfront, That's probably one of the most difficult properties to value because there's so few vacant waterfront land sales. So we're looking primarily trying to find comparable waterfront sales. And then you've got to look at what kind of water are you comparing it to.
Okay. And another observation was, and I noted to our director of our community development department, was that in a neighborhood I saw evidence of a deck being built, but there was no building permit displayed. And I was told, well, this was not one that was being built as a deck attached to the house. It was just being built in the backyard. Now, would that be picked up?
Yes, sir. If it's attached to the ground, it's going to be picked up.
But there was no building permit with that, and no building permit, my understanding, was required. But you would still pick that up?
Well, again, that's out of my wheelhouse because I don't know about what's required in building permits. But from an appraiser perspective, if a deck, and we see that often, whereby, let's say as an example, a deck was built to an above-ground pool. And the above-ground pool, they decided we don't want that anymore. And so you have this deck sitting out in the middle of your yard. And so we've seen property owners just take and go ahead and just finish putting railings all the way around the deck and then dropping a set of steps on it and going down to a nice patio, with a fire pit and that kind of thing. And so we're going to pick those items up if we see them, yes.
Okay. I'll stop.
No, you've been
I
am here at your...
You've been wonderful.
No.
And so what will happen is this. We'll still get more phone calls and more, well, I don't get many phone calls. I get emails. I think Councilman Hobbs gets a phone call. I will we'll get more and more of the emails, and we'll be, I think, better prepared.
Okay.
But my general response is to tell them that state code requires us to assess at 100% value.
That's correct.
And that the council does not have the ability to either reduce or even to phase it in over time.
That is correct.
And that currently we are just, we're looking at those, that there is an appeal process, and that we will look when the city manager presents her budget, then we'll consider then, what we do with respect to the tax rate.
Right.
But anyway, you've been wonderful.
Well, thank you.
We appreciate the information. We've got little things we can carry home and be prepared to respond to emails and things like that. And certainly, we appreciate that because I know this has been a challenging time.
It is, but we're working through it, and everybody's trying to be professional and answer folks' questions because we're all property owners too. We all face the same situation that our customers are facing. So we're not immune to that.
And I think the other aspect of it too is this: when you point out what values were perhaps back in 2008. If I were the same homeowner, then I probably have as much of a problem with it. But if I bought sometime when it was down,
right,
and now I've got this increase, then that, I think, becomes a problem for some of our homeowners. And
no,
so I think
understand.
that's an aspect of it.
I totally understand. I have lots of empathy for them because I understand what they're facing. Yeah.
Well, any other questions or comments? Yes.
I was glad you made the point about, the council will take up any decisions on a tax increase, the tax rate increase at a later time in the budget process.
Decrease.
Or decrease, whichever, I'm sorry. The tax increase, decrease, increase, decrease, or leave it the same. So, but anyway, but I think the assessment notice that goes out, the little card that you receive, I think actually has the amount of your taxes if the rate remains at the current level based on your assessment. And I think that some people are already reading that as council has raised my taxes on my house. And so I think it's important to understand that, that is your tax rate, assuming it stays the same based on the current assessment. As the mayor said, that, we haven't made any decision on that. Right. And we won't until we get closer to finalizing the budget. So I just, I've seen posts on social media and places that, council has raised my taxes when we actually haven't approved the tax rate.
Yeah, that's required by the state code on our, on those little cards that you get in the mail.
I just want to note that we're talking about not an increase because I figure you might be running for re-election. I wanted to help you out.
And to be clear, we have not finalized our budget at this point, but there's no consideration for raising the tax rate over $1.24. We don't know whether we will be able to lower the tax rate, and if so, how much. And one of the complicating factors this year could be the language that Ms. Melochick referenced that is in the most recent federal relief package that says states and territories cannot lower their tax rate. It's not yet clear whether localities are, as subsidiaries of the state, going to be impacted by that or not. So there's a lot of things we've got to figure out between now and when I release a budget on April 15th. But I have no problem saying I would not be asking for a rate increase over $1.24. We've got to figure out what the lay of the land is and what we can do given the pandemic effects on our commercial revenues, as well as what any federal regulations tied to federal aid may be for localities.
All hearts and minds clear? Okay.
Everybody good?
Again, thank you very much.